The last person Aiden Rivers expected to see in a quiet family restaurant was the woman who vanished from his life 3 years ago, let alone sitting at a table with 3 little boys who all shared his eyes, his hair, and his face. One look at them, and everything he thought he knew about his past, and his future, began to unravel. Aiden Rivers wasn't the kind of man who ended up in the wrong place. Every minute of his day was scheduled, monitored, and optimized by a team of assistants who knew better than to improvise. But that afternoon, his driver had taken a wrong exit off the freeway due to a last-minute traffic reroute, and instead of arriving at a high-profile dinner meeting at a luxury hotel downtown, Aiden found himself standing outside a small, tucked-away Italian restaurant that looked like it hadn't been renovated in at least 2 decades. He was ready to leave, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the flickering sign in the window, maybe the scent of garlic bread wafting through the air, or maybe, though he'd never admit it, the weight of exhaustion he hadn't let himself feel in years. He told the driver to wait and walked inside alone. The restaurant was warm and noisy, a family-run place with mismatched tablecloths, candles that had burned halfway down, and children's laughter bouncing off the walls. He chose a seat by the window, pulled out his phone, and planned to reply to a few emails before heading back out. The atmosphere was not his style. It was too alive. Too messy. But still, something about it made him pause. He was halfway through typing a message when he heard a sudden burst of giggling from behind him. He looked up instinctively, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on a table near the center. That's when he saw her. Scarlett. It took him a second to process it. She was older now, slightly, but still unmistakably her. The same thick dark hair, now pulled into a loose braid, the same graceful movements, the way she tilted her head when she listened to someone speak. And then he saw what surrounded her, 3 small boys, all with dark brown hair and shockingly bright blue eyes. One was trying to balance a breadstick on his nose. Another was playing with a crayon. The third was talking so fast she was struggling to keep up. Aiden felt his heart hit the floor. He watched, unable to look away, as one of the boys looked up and laughed. And it was his laugh. His exact laugh. The same one his mother used to point out when he was a child. His breath caught in his throat, and he leaned forward slightly, squinting, trying to convince himself that this wasn't what it so clearly looked like. But it was. He could see it in the shape of their faces. In the set of their jaws. In their eyes, mirrors of his own. They weren't just any children. They were his. The shock was so deep it silenced everything else inside him. All the anger he'd once felt toward her, all the unanswered questions, the way she had disappeared from his life 3 years ago without a single explanation, it all came crashing back, but now it was tangled with something far more powerful. Disbelief. And something dangerously close to grief. Scarlett hadn't seen him yet. She was helping one of the boys cut a meatball in half, her expression soft and patient, completely unaware of the storm unraveling just feet away. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't believe that the woman he had once imagined building a future with was sitting just across the room, surrounded by a future that had clearly happened without him. And in that moment, Aiden Rivers, CEO, billionaire, untouchable, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Powerless. Aiden sat frozen, his pulse pounding in his ears, as a million thoughts collided and collapsed inside his mind. He kept staring at Scarlett and the 3 boys with a kind of stunned detachment, like his brain hadn't caught up to what his eyes already knew. For a man who lived in absolutes, in numbers and control and certainty, the sight in front of him cracked something in the very foundation of his being. They looked like him. All 3 of them. Same dark hair, same piercing blue eyes, same subtle expressions that he recognized in himself when he looked in the mirror. There was no denying it. These weren't just any children, they were his sons. And she had never told him. He watched as Scarlett wiped one boy's mouth with a napkin and gently scolded another for trying to climb under the table. She looked tired, but not worn down. There was a quiet strength to her, the kind he remembered. The kind that had both drawn him in and pushed him away back then. He tried to connect the version of her he saw now with the memory of the woman who had walked away from his life 3 years ago without a word of explanation. She had simply disappeared. One day they were laughing on his balcony, sharing takeout and talking about ridiculous baby names for a future they joked about. The next, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. He had searched for her. Hired private investigators. Pulled strings. Made calls. Her apartment was empty, phone disconnected, bank accounts closed. It was like she had vanished off the grid. It had destroyed something in him, something vulnerable, hopeful, human. After that, he buried himself in work. He grew the company, made his first 100 million, bought a penthouse, built a brand so powerful no one dared to ask about the past. But the truth was, he'd never stopped wondering what happened to her. And now he knew. She hadn't just left. She had taken his children with her. His instinct was to storm over, demand answers, raise his voice. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way one of the boys reached for her hand and she squeezed it instinctively. Maybe it was the ease with which she navigated their chaos. Or maybe it was the strange, unfamiliar ache spreading in his chest, the weight of lost time. Finally, as if sensing the intensity of his stare, she turned her head and saw him. Their eyes locked. And the moment their gazes met, the entire room seemed to still. Her body tensed instantly. Her eyes widened. For a split second, she looked like someone seeing a ghost. Her lips parted like she might say something, but no words came. He stood slowly. Her eyes followed him as he walked toward her table. The boys didn't notice him at first, they were too busy fighting over crayons. But Scarlett didn't move. Didn't breathe. He stopped a few feet away. Scarlett. Her name fell from his mouth like a stone. Heavy. Real. The sound of it made her flinch, just slightly. Aiden, she whispered. Her voice was different. Still soft, but layered now with exhaustion and something else, guilt. He looked at the boys. They were still too distracted to realize what was unfolding. But Aiden couldn't take his eyes off them. He pointed subtly. There. She nodded. No lies. No hesitation. Yes. All the breath left his body. The truth was right there. Undeniable. I think we should talk, he said, barely keeping his voice steady. Scarlett glanced down at the boys, then back at him. Her shoulders straightened like she was bracing herself for impact. Yeah, she said quietly. We should. Scarlett stepped outside first, her movements cautious, careful, as if each step carried a different weight now that her secret was no longer hers alone. Aiden followed, his mind spiraling, his thoughts loud and unfiltered in the silence between them. The restaurant door shut behind them, muting the warmth and laughter of the families inside. Outside, the air felt sharper. Heavy. Real in a way that made it difficult to breathe. They stood near the edge of the sidewalk, just out of view from the restaurant windows. Scarlett crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her back straight, chin slightly raised like someone preparing for a fight they knew they couldn't win but had to endure anyway. Aiden, on the other hand, didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her. At her face, her eyes, the same ones he used to memorize when the world felt too complicated. She looked older. Not in a bad way, more grounded. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A sadness. Or maybe just years of survival. He didn't ask the obvious questions. Not yet. The truth was too raw, too exposed. So he started somewhere softer, even though it still burned in his throat. Why didn't you tell me? Scarlett blinked, once, slowly. Because I was terrified, she said. Of you. Of your world. Of how fast everything was moving when I found out. He clenched his jaw, trying not to let the anger rise so quickly. Terrified of what, exactly? That I wouldn't want them. No, she said quickly. I knew you would. I knew you'd be there, and you'd take responsibility, and you'd turn your life upside down if you had to. That's what scared me the most. That caught him off guard. So, you left because you thought I'd care too much? Scarlett exhaled. I left because I didn't know how to survive being consumed by you and your life. I knew what would happen. Headlines. Cameras. Contracts. Negotiations. They'd grow up under a microscope, and I couldn't do that to them. Or to you. You were on the edge of something huge, Aiden. I watched you climb so far so fast, and I didn't want to be the weight that slowed you down. He shook his head slowly, trying to absorb it all. You were never weight. You were the one part of my life that didn't feel manufactured. And you didn't even give me the chance to choose. Her expression broke slightly, the corners of her mouth pulling tight. I didn't want to be your burden. I wanted to protect them. And maybe, yes, maybe I wanted to protect myself too. He paced once, then turned back to her, eyes burning. You protected them by keeping them from their father? I protected them from becoming a story, she snapped, her voice rising. From being bought and sold by tabloids. From being used as leverage by people who only care about your company. You don't think I thought about what I was doing every day for the last 3 years? A long silence followed. Neither of them looked away. It was a kind of quiet that only came from two people who had once known every detail about each other and now couldn't recognize the parts that had changed. Finally, Aiden's voice softened. You don't have to justify what you did, Scarlett. Not right now. But I need to know one thing. She waited, shoulders tight. Do they know who I am? She swallowed hard. They know they have a dad. A good man. Someone I wasn't ready to bring into their world until I was sure they were ready too. Aiden nodded slowly. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else, resolve. Well, he said quietly, I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. Scarlett didn't answer, but something shifted in her face. A flicker of disbelief, maybe even hope. She turned slightly, glancing through the window toward the table where the boys still sat, completely unaware that the axis of their world had just begun to shift. When she looked back at him, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to let you in, Aiden. Then let me figure it out with you, he said. And for the first time since she'd walked away from him, she didn't run. The next morning, Aiden couldn't focus on anything. His phone buzzed with meeting reminders, emails stacked up unanswered, and his assistant knocked twice to ask if he'd be joining the board call, but he ignored them all. His thoughts were still outside that little restaurant, still standing on the sidewalk across from Scarlett, still locked in the silence that followed the truth. For a man who made decisions in seconds, who negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast, he now found himself caught in hesitation, unsure of how to take even the next step. He didn't know what the rules were anymore. He had children. 3 boys. His sons. And he'd missed everything, their first steps, first words, first birthdays. All of it gone, tucked into years he couldn't get back. The thought hollowed him in a way that scared him. Not because he felt guilt, but because he realized how much he wanted something he had never imagined before. He didn't just want to meet them. He wanted to know them. To belong to them in a way that had nothing to do with money or legacy or name. By early afternoon, he was back in his car, parked a block away from Scarlett's modest apartment building. It wasn't in a bad area, but it was clear she had chosen simplicity, privacy, safety. He hadn't told her he was coming. Part of him knew she might not open the door, but he needed to see them again. Even from a distance. When he saw her stepping outside with the boys bundled in light jackets, his breath caught. They were all holding hands, barely organized chaos, chattering over one another, pointing at birds, leaves, the sky. Scarlet spotted him immediately. She didn't look surprised. She hesitated, then walked toward him, her pace slow and deliberate. The boys followed like ducklings, two tugging at her arms and the third lagging behind, distracted by a stick he'd found. "We're going to the park," she said when she reached him. Her voice was neutral but not cold. "You can walk with us, if you want." He nodded, trying to hold back the gratitude that surged in his chest. "I'd like that." They walked together in awkward silence at first. The boys ran ahead, chasing each other. Aiden watched them like someone watching magic unfold. Every movement they made felt surreal to him. He had missed so much. Eventually, one of the boys, the smallest, fell. Scarlet started forward, but Aiden was faster. He knelt down, gently checking the boy's hands for scrapes. "Hey," Aiden said softly, brushing off the dirt. "You okay, buddy?" The boy looked up at him, eyes wide and bright. "I'm not a buddy," he said with a pout. "I'm Liam." Aiden froze. Scarlet smiled faintly from behind. "That's Liam," she confirmed. "Jake's the one in red. And Sam's the one who never listens." Aiden felt something shift in his chest. "Hi, Liam," he said again, softer now. I'm your dad." The boy tilted his head. "Really?" He nodded. "Yeah. Really." Liam studied him for a long second, then without warning, wrapped his little arms around Aiden's neck. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just a moment, a child's instinct. And it undid him. Aiden stayed crouched there long after Liam ran ahead. Scarlet stood next to him now, her expression unreadable, but her arms were no longer crossed. She didn't speak, and neither did he. She didn't need to. He felt it in the silence between them, something beginning again. Back at the apartment, she invited him up. Not for a conversation, not for clarity, but because the boys wanted to show him their superhero wall, a messy collage of drawings and stickers and crayon chaos taped across their bedroom. He followed them inside, trying to absorb every moment, every detail, their voices, their routines, the way they each hugged her without even thinking. As he stood in the middle of their world, with toys scattered around his feet and giggles echoing from the hallway, Aiden realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. He didn't want to be a visitor in their lives. He wanted to stay. Aiden began showing up every day, though never uninvited. He texted Scarlet first, always asking, never assuming. And every time she responded with a simple yes or a short, polite reply, she left the door cracked open a little wider. The boys didn't question his sudden presence in their lives. Children didn't carry doubt the way adults did. They accepted him the way they accepted everything else in their world, with open curiosity and a kind of honesty that made Aiden feel like he was relearning life from the ground up. He learned that Liam liked dinosaurs, that Sam could name every planet in the solar system, and that Jake had a quiet streak but lit up when someone really listened. They called him Aiden at first, which cut deeper than he let show. He never corrected them. He didn't want to force anything. But one afternoon, after helping Sam build a rocket ship out of cardboard boxes in the living room, Jake sat beside him, leaned in, and said softly, "Are you gonna be my dad now?" The question hit him harder than any boardroom ambush ever had. He looked into Jake's serious blue eyes and answered the only way he could. "If you want me to be." Jake nodded and didn't say anything else, but later that evening, all three boys started calling him Dad. No ceremony. No warning. Just a shift, as simple and profound as the turning of a page. Scarlet watched it all quietly. She still kept her distance, not emotionally cold, but hesitant. She had spent years building walls around herself and her children, walls that protected them from a world she once believed could destroy them. Now that world was in her living room, making peanut butter sandwiches and fixing broken toy trucks with duct tape and determination. The next few weeks became a quiet transformation neither of them had expected. Aiden started showing up in the boys' lives regularly, not as a force or disruption, but as something steady. Scarlett, cautious as ever, kept her walls high at first. She didn't offer more than what was necessary, and Aiden didn't push. He knew she was waiting to see if he'd disappear again, if his presence was just another performance, another temporary flicker from a man who lived in a world built on control and distance. But this time, he had no exit plan. He showed up on Sundays for park visits. He brought art supplies and joined in finger painting sessions that left his $1,000 shoes covered in glitter and glue. He helped build blanket forts in the living room and learned quickly that Sam hated peas, Jake loved dinosaurs, and Liam insisted on being called Captain Lightning at least once a day. They didn't question him. They simply accepted him, like he'd always belonged, like they were just waiting for him to arrive. That acceptance broke him in the quietest, most powerful way. Scarlett watched it all with guarded eyes. She had never seen him like this before. The man she remembered from their past was polished, reserved, a little distant even in his affection. But this version, this man kneeling on the floor tying shoelaces, making up bedtime stories, staying after they fell asleep just to sit in the silence, was something else entirely. She didn't know what to do with that. Every part of her that had hardened to survive now felt exposed. Not because he demanded anything, but because he didn't. One evening, after the boys had finally fallen asleep, Scarlett walked into the kitchen to find Aiden quietly washing dishes. He hadn't asked, hadn't said a word, just rolled up his sleeves and started cleaning. The sight of him there, out of his element and yet somehow perfectly at home, caught her off guard. "You don't have to do that," she said, leaning against the doorway. He looked over his shoulder and offered a half-smile. "I know. But I want to." She crossed her arms, watching him for a moment. "You were always good at doing what you wanted." He turned off the faucet, drying his hands slowly before facing her fully. "Not always. I was good at doing what I thought I was supposed to want. There's a difference." She didn't respond right away. Her guard was still up, but something in her chest was softening no matter how hard she fought it. "I don't know how to trust this. Any of it." "I know," he said gently. "And I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. Just let me be here. Let me prove it." She looked down at the floor. "You missed everything. Their first words, their first steps, birthdays, fevers, tantrums. You missed it all." He nodded. "I know. And I'll never get that time back. But I'm here now. And if you let me, I won't miss another thing." Silence filled the space between them, but it wasn't cold. It was thick with something unsaid, something pulsing and alive. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let him back in. But the risk terrified her. Because loving him again wouldn't be just her heart on the line, it would be 3 others too. Aiden stepped forward, not too close, not touching her, just enough to be heard fully. "I'm not the same man you left. And maybe you're not the same woman either. But maybe that's okay." She looked up then, meeting his eyes. There was no performance in them. No ambition. No strategy. Just truth. "I need time," she said finally. "You can have all of it," he replied. And with that, she nodded. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was the first real step towards something they both thought had been lost. Something fragile, but worth trying for. As the days slipped into weeks, a new kind of rhythm began to form. It was uneven, uncertain, but it was real. Aiden became part of their everyday lives, not in sweeping gestures or dramatic declarations, but in small, deliberate ways. He started arriving early enough to help get the boys ready for school and stayed late enough to read bedtime stories, even when work demanded his attention elsewhere. He didn't try to buy their affection. He didn't overwhelm them with gifts or flashy distractions. He simply showed up, again and again, with quiet consistency, as if every moment was a chance to earn back a piece of the time he'd lost. Scarlett watched everything with a cautious heart. She wanted to believe that the man folding tiny socks on her couch and building Lego castles in the living room was the same Aiden she had once loved, but different in all the right ways. Yet the fear never fully left her. She'd spent 3 years doing everything alone, every tantrum, every doctor visit, every impossible decision. It had made her strong, but it had also built walls so high she couldn't always tell if they were protecting her or isolating her. One evening, as autumn crept in and the air turned crisp, Scarlett found herself sitting on the porch steps with a blanket over her shoulders, watching the boys chase fireflies in the fading light. Aiden sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees, his dress shirt rolled up at the sleeves, quiet and comfortable in the kind of domesticity he once would have found foreign. "They talk about you all the time now," she said after a long silence. "Even when you're not here." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What do they say?" She smiled softly. "Liam says your voice sounds like Batman. Jake thinks you can fix anything. Sam asked me if you know how to fly a plane because, quote, he's rich and rich people do that stuff." Aiden laughed, but there was emotion behind it. "They're incredible." "They are," she said. "And they're mine. Every breath, every scar, every inch of them. I didn't do it perfectly, but I did it with everything I had." He nodded, solemn now. "I know. And I never doubted that. Even when I was angry, even when I didn't understand why you left. I knew you were doing what you believed was right." Scarlett's eyes glistened in the low light. "I still don't know if it was. I just knew I couldn't raise them in your world. Or maybe, I didn't know how to." Aiden sat up straighter, his voice low but firm. "Then let's make a new one. Not mine. Not yours. Ours. One they can grow up in without needing to unlearn who they are." She looked at him for a long time, her fingers tightening around the edges of her blanket. "I don't want to raise them with someone who might walk away when it gets hard." "I walked away from everything except you," he said. "The only thing I ever regretted losing was what we had. And now, them. You. This. I'm not walking away. Not this time." It was the most vulnerable thing she'd ever heard him say. And it cracked something open inside her. That night, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, she handed him a folded piece of paper. On it were the boys' birth certificates. His name wasn't listed. Until now, it hadn't been. "I'm ready for them to know who their father really is," she whispered. "Legally. Fully. Not just in stories." Aiden looked down at the paper for a long time, overwhelmed by the weight of what it meant. This wasn't just about parenthood. It was about forgiveness. About trust. About being invited into a space that had once been completely closed to him. He looked back at her, his voice soft but certain. "Thank you." Scarlett nodded, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. They were building something now. Not starting over, because what they had before was gone. But what lay ahead was something new, something neither of them had imagined they'd get a second chance at. And it was worth every hard conversation, every scar, every silent night. The legal process moved slower than Aiden expected, but he didn't complain. Every meeting with the attorney, every signature, every background check, it all felt like steps towards something solid, something that couldn't be taken away from him this time. He sat through each one with a quiet kind of reverence, as though the paper trail finally matched the truth he had come to feel in his bones. He was their father, and not just in memory or biology, but in presence, in choice. In every morning he helped them get dressed and every night he stayed to read until they drifted to sleep. Scarlett watched the transformation quietly, still unsure how to label what was happening between them. They weren't a couple again, not officially. There was no kiss, no romantic declarations. But Aiden was in her home almost every day. He knew where the cereal was, which boy needed his blanket warmed in the dryer before bed, and which one still woke up with bad dreams. He folded laundry while she handled emails, learned how to make pancakes with smiley faces, and once even braided Scarlett's hair in the early morning chaos when one of the boys asked, "Why doesn't mommy get a turn too?" One evening, after a long day, the boys were tucked in early, and a rare quiet settled over the house. Aiden was on the porch again, this time with a notebook open in his lap. Scarlett walked out holding 2 mugs of tea, one of which she handed him without a word. He took it, surprised at the gesture, and glanced at her with a tired but grateful expression. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the notebook. He hesitated before answering. "Names. Names. For the trust fund I'm setting up. Not just for them. For others like them. Kids raised by strong mothers who did everything alone." Scarlett didn't reply at first. She sipped her tea and stared out at the quiet street. "I never wanted your money," she said eventually, softly. "I know," he said. "That's why I want to give it." She looked over at him then, and there was a silence that passed between them, the kind filled with meaning but not yet resolution. She still didn't know what to do with all of it, with how present he had become, how gentle, how different. She wanted to believe this wasn't temporary, that it wasn't some guilt-fueled overcorrection. But a voice deep inside her still warned her to be careful. "Why are you really here, Aiden?" she asked suddenly. "Is it just the kids?" He didn't answer right away. He closed the notebook, set it aside, and turned to face her completely. "No," he said. "It started with them. But it's not just them. It's you too." Scarlett exhaled slowly, her heart pounding in a way that felt both old and unfamiliar. "I don't know if I can go through losing you again," she admitted. "If I let this go too far and it falls apart, it won't just hurt me. It'll hurt them too." "I'm not asking you to leap," he said. "Just to walk beside me. And if I can't, then I'll keep walking anyway. With or without the title, or the label, or anything else. I'll be here. Because this is where I should have been all along." Her throat tightened. He wasn't trying to win her. He wasn't even trying to persuade her. He was just telling the truth. That night, she didn't ask him to leave. And when he stayed, sleeping on the couch, wrapped in one of the boys' superhero blankets, it wasn't because he had to, or because he insisted. It was because, slowly, quietly, he was becoming home. Winter came softly that year, bringing early darkness and quiet mornings layered in frost. The boys were old enough now to notice the change in the air, to be excited about coats and gloves and the promise of snow. Scarlett found herself watching them more than usual, the way they ran into Aiden's arms the moment he stepped through the door, the way they leaned on him like they had always known he would be there. Sometimes it still caught her off guard, how natural it looked, how simple. But there was nothing simple about what it took to get there. She had built this life brick by brick with her bare hands, and somehow, without warning, Aiden had walked back into it and become a part of the foundation. One evening, close to the holidays, the house was buzzing with energy. The boys were helping decorate a small tree Scarlett had picked up earlier that week, each of them arguing over who got to hang which ornament. Aiden sat on the floor between them, smiling through the chaos, untangling a string of lights that had no intention of cooperating. Scarlett stood in the doorway with a mug in her hands, watching the scene, letting herself feel the weight and warmth of it. Later, after the boys were finally asleep and the house had fallen into that rare kind of calm that only came after a full, happy day, Aiden found her sitting on the edge of the bed she used to sleep in alone. She didn't speak when he walked in. She just looked at him, her eyes soft but guarded, still asking a question he hadn't answered completely. He crossed the room and sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat from her skin but not close enough to touch. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "But I think I should." She looked over at him, waiting. "I didn't come back to fix the past," he said. "I can't. I lost too much time, and I'll never get it back. But I can be here now. And I want to be, for you, for them, in whatever way you'll let me. No pressure. No timelines. Just truth. Scarlett stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. You know, I used to dream about this. About you coming back. But in the dream, I was angry. I yelled. I made you earn it. He smiled gently. That sounds fair. But now that you're here, she continued, all I feel is, tired. Tired of holding everything on my own. Tired of being afraid to need someone. You don't have to be afraid, he said. Needing someone doesn't make you weak. It makes me vulnerable. Then be vulnerable, he said quietly. With me. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man she had once run from but the man who had returned and stayed. The man who braided hair with clumsy fingers, who read bedtime stories with too much expression, who kissed skinned knees and tied tiny shoes without ever expecting applause. The man who had changed, not because she asked him to, but because life had demanded it of him and he had chosen to grow. She reached out then, her hand resting gently on his. I don't want to do this alone anymore, she whispered. You never have to again. They didn't kiss. Not that night. It wasn't about that. It was about the way her head rested on his shoulder moments later. The way his hand found hers and didn't let go. The way the silence between them wasn't silence anymore, but peace. Weeks passed. The paperwork was finalized. Aiden's name was written, legally and forever, beside theirs. He moved into a small house 2 blocks away, giving Scarlett space, but never too much. They co-parented with ease, with warmth, with laughter. And slowly, the love that had once been buried under years of pain and distance began to take root again, real this time, stronger because of everything it had survived. On a quiet Sunday morning, as snow fell outside and the boys curled up between them on the couch with cartoons playing low on the screen, Scarlett looked at Aiden and saw not the man he had been or the mistakes he'd made. She saw the man who stayed. The man who showed up. The man who, against every odd and after every storm, had come home. To me, the ending of this story isn't just a resolution, it's a quiet triumph of love earned, not assumed. It's about 2 people who were torn apart by fear and silence but found their way back through presence, growth, and patience. What makes this ending powerful is not that everything turns out perfectly, but that the characters choose each other again, with their scars, their history, and all the weight of what they've been through. Aiden doesn't return as a savior. He comes back as a man willing to unlearn his old self, to show up every day not with grand promises, but with quiet consistency. And Scarlett doesn't forgive easily, she protects her children, holds her boundaries, and only opens her heart again when she truly sees he's changed. Their reunion feels earned because it's not driven by nostalgia or fantasy, but by who they've become apart and who they're willing to be together. What I love most is how the story honors healing, not just as an idea, but as a lived, daily experience. The characters don't pretend the past didn't hurt. They acknowledge it, and they build something better because of it. In a world full of quick fixes and surface-level redemption arcs, this ending feels rare. It's gentle. It's grounded. And that's what makes it unforgettable.